Well, Ryan, that's a great transition to the Michigan primary election results.
Look at that.
Yeah, it really is perfect, especially with the electric vehicle point. Not just the UAW, but specifically the electric. Yeah, I think it's the fish, the wave of euphoria.
That's right.
You're
Yes,
so
the
right.
jam really flowed.
Yes. So in Michigan last night, Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, 68 to 27%. So 68% for Donald Trump, 27% for Nikki Haley. One of the big stories, though, although you weren't hearing a lot about it in the media this morning, is that 13% of Michigan voters selected uncommitted. So Joe Biden got 81% of the vote, 13% went to uncommitted. If you're doing the math there, that's because also another 5 percentage points, as one of our great producers pointed out for us, went to Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. So 100,000 votes, more than 100,000 votes, went to uncommitted. You add 22,000 for Marianne and 20,000 for Dean Phillips into the mix, and you're almost getting to 1 out of every 5 voters. 1 in every 8 went for uncommitted, but Michigan is a state that Joe Biden barely won. I think it was around 3 points. He eked out a victory in 2020. So a huge battleground state for him. And if you're doing the math, Ryan, in a primary election, which is generally low turnout, and in fact, 40% more voters turned out for Republicans than Democrats last night. So if you're doing the math for Biden come November, this is a very, very bad sign. We know that they were expecting potentially a bad sign because they've dispatched all of their aides, not all of them, but an army of aides to Dearborn and the Muslim American communities in Michigan. So they understand that they have a problem on their hands here. But I think that problem might be bigger than even they realized.
Yeah, the low turnout is key because you have to combine the two things.
Yes, 100%.
So the 100,000 plus people in Michigan turned out to the polls to vote uncommitted. Like they walked to their polling place, they got on a bus, they drove. In many cases, they registered that day just to register the fact that they wanted to reject Biden, that they were not willing to vote for Biden, a complete rejection of what they were being offered. The rest that represent that gap of 40, 50% between Democrats and Republicans rejected the status quo by just staying home. And that hurts Democrats just as much in November. Ask Hillary Clinton what happens in Michigan when people are so unenthusiastic or opposed to your campaign that they just don't bother to show up on Election Day.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because I was reading a news report, I think this was in the New York Times this morning, about how, you know, if the Arab American vote swings 30% to Donald Trump in Michigan, it could be enough for Joe Biden to end up losing. They had a poll that showed something like that in the works, potentially a Times Siena poll. But to your point, just talking about a swing towards Trump is wildly insufficient. I mean, turnout is equally an important part of the equation there. So when you have 40% more Republican voters turning out than Democratic voters, I think that's not a great sign for Joe Biden, who, if you understand that there's a battle over uncommitted happening, you really want to make your mark for Joe Biden, you go turn out in the polls. So to have low turnout, even if it's, you know, a pretty obvious outcome, right? You know that Joe Biden ultimately is going to prevail, but you would want to stamp down talk of, quote, uncommitted. You show up to vote.
Yeah, and I think that the bigger problem for the Biden campaign is that they and their enablers in the media harbored this genuinely kind of racist view that it was only Arab and Muslim voters that cared about this genocide going on. The idea that there is universal concern for women, children, elderly, innocent people getting killed is just kind of anathema to this increasingly, I guess, identitarian politics that has taken hold in the Democratic Party, where you would have people saying, you know what, only 2% of the Michigan population is Arab, so this isn't actually a problem. It's like, you really think that it's only Arab people that care about children getting killed by the hundreds every single day? And secondly, because the way the census works, it's not 2%. It's significantly more than 2%. But what these results showed is that racist assumption was utterly flawed. Basically, everywhere around Michigan, at least 10% of the electorate voted uncommitted. Places that have close to zero Arab American population. Now, in Dearborn and places like that, you saw absolute blowouts for uncommitted. But in, say, Ann Arbor, you had something like 30% of people coming out and voting uncommitted. So
And we can put
it's
these
not-
up on the screen,
you
by
can
the
put
way.
this up here, and it's also not just young people. You also hear young people and Arab Americans. Like that is the way that people have generously started to expand it. Oh yeah, those soft-hearted young people, they also care about genocide. That's also not true. Like the penetration of opposition to genocide is across the demographic board. Now, how many people are going to come out and express that, varies, but it's not just isolated.
So, yeah, and if you were just looking at that map, you saw, again, that Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson had more than 40,000 votes between them, in addition to the more than 100,000 votes.
And those
that
are
went for
protest
uncommitted.
votes.
Absolutely.
Nobody walked into the polling place thinking that if they voted for Marianne, that she was going to win, or that they voted for Dean, that he's going to become the nominee. That's sending a signal. And both of those candidates were deeply frustrated that all of the kind of social media energy and the kind of public on the ground grassroots energy became organized around voting uncommitted. And no doubt, like back in 1968, you had McCarthy to vote for. Like it's easier for organizers if somebody is running on a popular banner of peace, and it becomes the one that you're going to vote for to send that signal. That's much easier.
Yeah.
But the population wants to express its democratic will and is going to find a way to do it.
Right.
Often they find that way to do it by just not voting and just not showing up. This gave people an opportunity to say, okay, I can actually show up and be heard and have my frustration against this shown.
So let's put A2 up on the screen. This is some notable, quote, uncommitted / no preference vote shares from Obama's uncontested 2012 primaries. So again, this happened in 2012. Those were very low turnout primaries because, satisfaction with the candidate was a lot higher than it is with Biden. So Kentucky was at 42%. Michigan itself was at 11%. North Carolina, 21%, and then you had some other states, Rhode Island, Tennessee. People were organized, and Ryan, you probably covered that at the time. Mobilized enough people to come out to uncommitted to the point where it was 42% in Kentucky. But again, that was a totally different context.
And bigger raw numbers here.
Yes.
Like the number of well over 100,000 is the one that they're going to have to take home.
The satisfaction with Obama on behalf of Democrats in 2011, relatively high compared to...
Although Bernie was calling for, to his eternal kind of electoral chagrin, was calling for a primary challenge to Obama because he was embracing austerity at the time. By the time of the election, he had gone into kind of populist mode, painting Romney as the plutocrat that he was. Yeah. And so the left was... And there was no primary challenge. They're a little back behind that, but yeah. Yeah,
it's not like everyone was, Obama is this, the savior of the working class. But it was, satisfaction with
Mitt Romney.
Satisfaction with Joe Biden is on dissatisfaction with Joe Biden's on another level in this case. So let's go ahead and pivot to this conflict that bubbled over on CNN last night.
We knew that cable news was going to have a measured, sober response to the Michigan public declaring its opposition to this genocide, and they delivered for us. Let's show a friend of the show, Nina Turner here, walking into the Lion's Den and trying to actually talk substance with a CNN horse race panel, and let's see how well that goes.
And I think sometimes as we talk about this issue, we're centering President Biden. We are centering former President Donald J. Trump when the uncommitted effort is to center the people closest to the pain. And that is the Arab American community. That is the Palestinian community. That is communities that care about peace. And so while this president was in the ice cream shop saying, I think there's going to be a ceasefire, 30,000 people have been slaughtered. People are living in famine. They can't get medical care. So it can't come soon enough for them. And that was really the weight that I picked up on when I was in Dearborn. So we get to be comfortable and talk about this like these people are widgets when they are in fact suffering. And I am young enough to remember, colleagues, when Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and also Congresswoman Cori Bush called for a ceasefire very early on. They were called abhorrent. Now, fast forward to all of these bodies laying in the wake and people who are living through this every single day.
So by the way, there's also been slaughter in Israel.
I was going to say.
So there's a lot of pain on both sides.
No,
so
I'm not.
We don't really need a lecture on the problem. But I'm talking about the politics of this tonight. What to you would be a victory, as somebody was calling for this uncommitted vote, what to you would be a victory tonight to get that message across?
I'm not denying that pain. All I'm saying that at a certain point after October the 7th, it becomes clear. I mean, you have a right-wing prime minister.
Right. We don't need to debate the issue.
But you understand what I'm saying? I'm not denying anybody's pain. What I am saying is that this president and our country has the power to say to Netanyahu, we need a permanent ceasefire. The only time hostages...
Within reason, though, if I can push back here...
Wait, one more point. The only time hostages were released is when we had that brief ceasefire. That is another reason why we need a permanent ceasefire.
I also have to remind people we had a ceasefire prior to October 7th.
Well, that was uncomfortable.
And let me just say something in defense of Nina Turner there that people might not recognize. So in that back and forth there, so when Anderson Cooper jumps in, he's like, hold on, there's pain on both sides here. And then tries to move it back to the horse race. And he's like, give me your view of the politics here. And then she takes it back to the pain. Like he gets upset with her. Like, hey, I told you to take this back to the horse race. But if she hadn't done that, she knows that she's constantly getting hit as hostile to Israel and maybe even anti-Semitic.
Yep.
And that if she didn't respond to that, then that would be the thing that people would hit her for.
That's the story.
So she has to then. So he kind of forces her to respond to that, and then gets upset with her that when she does, actually respond to that. But it was interesting to see the panel just so reflexively unable to even kind of think about the substance of the issue. Like, why are people voting the way that they did?
Yeah, we don't need a lecture on the problem line is
come on,
not collegial. So it tells me that Anderson Cooper must have
and that felt directed at the voters too, in a way. Like frustrated at the voters that they're like going to lecture about. And you saw people saying that these like voters and who want their moral clarity, what a lot of them are demanding is not actually that much. They're just saying, just call for a ceasefire.
So on this point, we also have an exchange between Jake Tapper and Debbie Dingell to roll. Let's watch that.
And what is it? You have with about 16% of the vote in. So it's going to be a sizable uncommitted vote. Is this a surprise to you in any way? And what do you make of this potential impact? Will the White House change course in any way?
So, first of all, it's not a surprise to me. I've been telling people that. We have a campaign called Listen to Michigan with people that want to be listened to. But, as everybody started acting surprised tonight or we're looking at figures, I said to multiple people over the course of the last month, my district, Washtenaw County, which has got Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, and everybody really ignores me when I say Ypsilanti too, I bet have more uncommitted votes than Dearborn. And as you're watching, I'm going to be right. And I expected it because it's not just the Arab American Muslim community. It's young people who are, want to be heard, are concerned, have the same concerns about, they know what Hamas did was a terrorist act, but they are watching innocent civilians be killed and the kind of damage that's there. We've got to talk about that issue, but we've got to talk about a lot of other issues too.
So actually sounding a little bit like Nina Turner from one of the most moderate members, one of the most centrist members of the House of Representatives. Now, Tapper doesn't shut her down like Cooper shut down Anderson Cooper, I think because she delivered it in a way that strikes, your average CNN anchor as being a different angle than listening to Nina Turner, who's someone on the left. But if it comes out of the mouth of a centrist, it's exactly the point you were making, right? She's talking about Ypsilanti. She's talking about Ann Arbor.
She won a bunch of credibility, too, because she was the person in 2016 who was, most loudly yelling at the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Like Michael Moore.
Telling them that they were misunderstanding what was happening in Michigan and that they were on the brink of losing it. And she was doing that publicly enough that when it actually came to pass, everybody was like, oh, yeah, Debbie Dingell was saying that. So now when she talks and makes an electoral argument, people listen. One of the kind of, I think, hard to swallow pills for people is the Biden line that comes out where he says, well, this is not about electoral politics. This is about doing the right thing. It's like, well, that's almost worse. Yeah. Like the idea that you look at your handling of this assault since October 7th, and you look at the 30,000 dead, plus, there was just recent projections that, you're looking at, even if there's a ceasefire right now, you're looking at tens of thousands more. You're looking at the Israeli civilians in coordination with the IDF setting up bouncy castles and having carnivals outside of the fence into Gaza, and at those carnivals protesting and blocking aid from getting in, while children have now gone from the brink of famine, the brink of starvation, to actually starving to death. And so you look at that and you say, you think you're the one who's ignoring electoral implications and doing the right thing? Then you are a moral creature of like such disrepute that we don't mind seeing you lose.
The sanctimony.
No matter what the consequences are.
So on another note, I mean, again, Debbie Dingell was talking about this not being isolated to Dearborn, and that was a point that you made, Ryan, which means that this translates outside of Michigan. Yes. That's a really important point.
They're moving to Minnesota, like Minnesota's next, and you're going to see people pushing to vote uncommitted or whatever. I don't know the exact what you can vote on the ballot. Michigan has the uncommitted line, but in Minnesota, they're going to be pushing for something similar. New Hampshire, they've said write-in ceasefire. You have to do something different in every state because we've got these federated electoral systems.
So literally, as we were talking, one of the candidates that we mentioned here, someone who got 22,000 votes in Michigan last night, unsuspended her campaign, and that would be Marianne Williamson. Again, this happened as we were discussing this on air and taping this very segment. Let's take a listen to what Marianne had to say.
Hey, I have an important announcement to make. As of today, I am unsuspending my campaign for the presidency of the United States. I had suspended it because I was losing the horse race, but something so much more important than the horse race is at stake here, and we must respond.
Ryan, Marianne Williamson unsuspending her campaign, the uncommitted movement now with a little bit of momentum, going to, like you said, Minnesota. California's got a primary coming up. We're rolling right into Super Tuesday. It looks like Biden might be facing a seriously mobilized protest vote movement in this primary now.
Yes, across the Democratic Party, the opposition to his unconditional support for Israel's war effort is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. There was a poll recently that showed that there's double-digit opposition from Jewish Democrats, and significant double-digit, not like 10 or 12. I don't remember the exact number, but it's significant opposition, and that stretches across the board. There's basically no demographic in the Democratic coalition that supports what Biden is doing, and so they're going to be looking for any channel to express that opposition.
And just before we leave this block, I know we didn't cover much Trump-Haley ground because basically the results are really similar to what people expected. Right. So 68 to 27. Again, that's the breakdown. There was a 538 polling average.
So 5% uncommitted, right? If I'm doing my math right?
Somewhere around there. But there's and Nikki Haley, to your point, is kind of a protest vote to Donald Trump. There's not a lot of people who are like, I just love Nikki Haley. There's some people, of course.
There's Democrats that love her.
There's some, exactly. Exactly. But again, there was a 538 average that I saw getting a little bit of traction on the internet last night. And I went and looked at it. It was like a few polls over the course of the last couple of months. And so Trump did underperform that by about 10 points. It had him in the mid to high 70s. And again, he ended up at 68.
That's been a pattern, right? He keeps underperforming his polls.
He keeps underperforming, although I don't necessarily know that that's a huge, again, when the polls are in state levels, I mean, polls just aren't always, if you have a polling average of a couple polls in Michigan, I don't know what that means, but it's still, obviously, the quote that I wanted to read from this Axios report was about Nikki Haley. They said, but a sizable chunk, Nikki Haley's performance. So again, 27%. And Nikki Haley, when she was in South Carolina, her home state, that she poured way more money into than Donald Trump poured into South Carolina. She actually outspent Ron DeSantis and Trump in Iowa. She wildly outspent Donald Trump in New Hampshire. So she's pouring a lot of money into these states, getting 30, 40% of the vote. Again, we saw that happen last night, significant in a place where Donald Trump has always felt at home. It's done a lot of stuff in Michigan. Axios says that the vote vote for Nikki Haley shows that, quote, but a sizable chunk of Republican voters may never be on board with Donald Trump. Yeah, like it's 2024. We've known that since 2015. We've seen it again since 2016. We saw it in 2018. We saw it in 2020. We saw it in 2022. We did not need Nikki Haley coming at 27% in Michigan to show that a sizable chunk of Republican voters may never be on board with Donald Trump. But thank you, Mike Allen, for pointing that out. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.